The morning sun spilled through the massive glass windows of the Winston estate, a mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. The marble floors glistened, the chandeliers sparkled, and the air carried that quiet kind of wealth, the kind that didn't have to prove itself. Eleanor Winston, the lady of the house, sat at the breakfast table, sipping her coffee with a kind of distant grace. Her diamond bracelet caught the light every time she moved her wrist. Across from her, her husband Richard was lost behind the morning newspaper, the sound of paper rustling blending with the faint hum of the housekeeper's footsteps in the distance. They had everything. Except peace. Their only son, Noah Winston, had left for college 2 years ago after a fight that left the house colder than its marble floors. Since then, silence had become the language of the Winstons. That silence was broken one morning when Eleanor's friend, Marjorie, called with a suggestion. "You still don't have help for the downstairs staff? I know someone," Marjorie said cheerfully. "A young woman named Clara, she's quiet, hardworking, been through a lot I hear, could use a job." Eleanor agreed reluctantly, not because she needed more help but because she needed a distraction. 2 days later, a small black car pulled up in front of the Winston mansion. Out stepped a young woman, maybe 22, 23, wearing a faded gray dress, her dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Her eyes were big, but they carried something behind them, a kind of guarded pain, like someone who'd seen too much too soon. "Good morning," she said softly when Eleanor opened the door. "Clara Wright." "Yes, ma'am." "Come in." Clara's shoes squeaked against the polished floors as she stepped inside. She looked around at the gold-framed paintings, the grand staircase, the fresh white roses in crystal vases, all of it too beautiful, too far from the world she'd come from. Eleanor led her through the kitchen, pointing things out. "You'll start with cleaning the downstairs rooms, keep the counters polished, and please, the library is off limits unless I say otherwise." Clara nodded quickly, taking mental notes of everything. She moved with quiet precision, her hands trembling slightly whenever Eleanor spoke. But there was something else in her eyes when she glanced around the house, a flicker of recognition she tried hard to hide. For the next few weeks, Clara worked silently. She never spoke unless spoken to. She cleaned, cooked, organized, and disappeared into the background like she'd been trained to be invisible. But the other staff noticed her quiet intelligence. She knew things about the house, where certain items were stored, where the family portraits had once hung before being moved, which door creaked on the east hallway, things no newcomer should have known. "Have you worked in this house before?" one of the maids asked one afternoon. Clara froze. "No," she said quickly, "just reminds me of a place I used to know." Eleanor began noticing her too, not because of her work, but because of the way Clara sometimes looked at her. There was no defiance in her gaze, just a strange, deep sadness, as if Eleanor reminded her of someone she'd lost. One night, Eleanor passed by the kitchen and saw Clara sitting alone at the table, staring at a small locket in her hand. Inside, it was an old photo, faded and cracked, of a baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. When Eleanor stepped closer, Clara quickly closed the locket and stood up. "Sorry, ma'am, I didn't hear you come in." "It's all right," Eleanor said softly. "That's a beautiful locket. Is that your child?" Clara's lips trembled. "No, someone else." She left before Eleanor could ask anything more. That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Something about that girl stirred memories she'd buried long ago, memories of a hospital room, of doctors' voices, of a baby's cry that stopped too soon. The next morning, Richard mentioned something odd. "The new maid, she asked me where the family records are kept, said she needed them to find the cleaning schedule, but she knew which cabinet I kept them in." Eleanor frowned. "Maybe she saw you open it once." "I doubt it," Richard said, lowering his paper. "She's peculiar, there's something about her." Later that week, Eleanor decided to test her theory. She called Clara into the study. "You've done well," she said kindly, "but I want to know, where did you learn to keep things so neat? You fold the napkins the exact same way my mother taught me." Clara hesitated. "I guess I've just seen it somewhere," she murmured. Eleanor smiled faintly, trying to read her face, but before she could continue, the doorbell rang. Noah had returned from college, unannounced. When he walked in, tall and confident, with that restless energy of youth, the whole house seemed to breathe again. Eleanor hugged him tightly, hiding her tears in his shoulder. Richard patted his son's back, pretending not to be emotional. Clara stood at the end of the hall, frozen. No one noticed her, their eyes met for just a second and something unspoken passed between them. A strange familiarity. A flicker of memory neither could name. Over the next few days, Noah saw Clara often. She was quiet but efficient, never lingering around, yet every time she passed he found himself looking up, curious. Once he caught her standing in the library, staring at an old portrait of Alina holding a baby. "That's my mom and me," Noah said, walking in, "taken when I was a few months old." Clara turned sharply. "You were her only child." "As far as I know," he laughed. "Why?" "No reason," she said softly, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. That night when everyone had gone to sleep, Clara returned to the library. She stood before that same portrait, tears sliding down her cheeks. She whispered under her breath, "That's me." The next morning, Alina found a cup shattered in the kitchen. Clara was on her knees cleaning it up, her hands trembling. "Clara, are you okay?" "I'm fine, ma'am," she said, trying to smile, "just dizzy." Alina helped her up and in that moment noticed something. A small birthmark near Clara's wrist, the same one her lost baby had. Her heart stopped. She stared at it, her throat tightening. Where did you get that mark?" Clara pulled her sleeve down quickly. "I've had it since birth." Alina's voice faltered. "Do you know where you were born?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "No, I was adopted when I was 3. They told me my mother died." For the first time, Alina couldn't breathe. She excused herself, went upstairs, and opened an old wooden box in her drawer, the one she hadn't touched in 20 years. Inside was a hospital bracelet, yellowed with age, and a faded report: baby girl Winston, presumed deceased after neonatal accident. Her hands shook violently. She stared at the name Clara. The same name. Downstairs, Clara stood in the kitchen, unaware of the storm that was about to break over her life. But the way Alina's voice trembled when she next called her name, "Clara, come here, please," told her something inside the house had just changed forever. Alina looked at her not as an employer, but as a mother staring at a ghost she thought she'd buried 2 decades ago. And in that charged silence, two broken lives stood face to face, one filled with questions, the other with unspeakable guilt. But before either could speak, Richard entered the room. "Alina, what's going on?" Alina froze. Clara lowered her head. The air turned electric. Alina whispered, almost inaudible, "She looks exactly like her, Richard." Richard frowned. "Like who?" Alina's eyes filled with tears. "Our daughter." Richard's face went pale. "Alina, our daughter died." But Alina's voice was trembling with both fear and hope. "Then tell me why she has her birthmark." Richard's hand slipped from the table. For the first time in years, the unshakable man of the house looked terrified. Clara stepped back, eyes darting between them. "What are you talking about?" Alina opened her mouth to answer, but Richard cut her off. "Enough, you're upsetting her and yourself. This is ridiculous." He turned to Clara. "You can go." Clara hesitated, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to stay to ask questions, but she obeyed. She disappeared down the hall, clutching her locket, the only clue she'd ever had to who she really was. Alina stood still, shaking. "Richard, I know what I saw." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "You don't understand, that baby is gone, you're torturing yourself." But deep inside, his eyes flickered as if he knew something too, something he'd buried even deeper than she had. Alina noticed it, and in that moment, for the first time in her marriage, she realized maybe the truth wasn't lost. Maybe it was hidden. And someone in that house was hiding it. The night fell heavy over the Winston mansion. Clara cried silently in her small servant's room, clutching the locket. Upstairs, Alina lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the same question over and over. Could she really be my daughter? Down the hall, Richard sat alone in his study, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand, his eyes fixed on an old, sealed envelope marked, "For Alina, only if she asks." He never wanted her to. But now, it was only a matter of time. The night pressed down on the Winston mansion like a secret. Every window was dark except one, the faint glow spilling from the study. Inside, Alina sat at her husband's desk, trembling hands rifling through drawers she'd never dared to open before. She knew Richard was hiding something. He had that same look, the one he'd worn 20 years ago when the hospital called. The old envelope marked for Alina only if she asks lay in front of her now. She hesitated. The edges were yellow, the ink fading, but the handwriting was unmistakable, Richard. Her heart pounded. She tore it open. Inside were two documents. The first, a hospital report from St. Mary's Medical Center dated the same day their baby was born. The second, a legal form, private adoption authorization. Her blood ran cold. She read the name aloud in a whisper, Clara Hope Winston. The room spun. Richard had known, he hadn't told her. Their daughter hadn't died, she'd been given away. A sharp sound broke her trance, the creak of a floorboard. She turned. Clara stood at the doorway, eyes wide, face pale. I heard something break, Clara said softly. Are you okay? Alina's voice trembled. Come in, Clara. Clara stepped inside, the dim light catching the locket around her neck. Alina reached forward slowly. May I see that locket again? Clara hesitated, then nodded, placing it in Alina's shaking hands. The metal was worn, but on the back, faintly engraved, were 3 letters, EW. Alina gasped. Where did you get this? I've had it as long as I can remember, Clara said. It was with me at the orphanage. Alina looked up, tears spilling down her cheeks. Clara, that's my engraving. I gave that locket to my baby before they took her from me. Clara froze, her breath catching. What are you saying? Alina's voice cracked. I think you're my daughter. The room seemed to stop breathing. For a moment, neither of them spoke, just silence thick enough to feel. Then Clara stepped back, shaking her head. No, that's not possible. They told me my mother died. Alina reached for her hand. They lied to you. Someone did. Look. She held up the documents, her voice trembling. Your name is here, Clara Hope Winston. Clara stared at the paper, her vision blurring through tears. Winston, she whispered, tasting the name like it belonged to another life. Then why did you give me away? Alina's voice broke. I didn't. I thought you were dead, your father. She stopped herself. Clara's eyes snapped up. He knew. Alina looked away, guilt twisting her face. I think so. Clara's jaw tightened. He sold me, didn't he? Alina's tears fell freely now. I don't know, Clara, but I swear to you I'll find out. Clara pulled her hand away. How could you not know? How could a mother not know her child was alive? Her voice cracked under the weight of 20 years of pain. Do you know what it's like, Mrs. Winston, growing up in homes where no one wants you, watching families choose other children while you sit there wondering what's wrong with you? Alina cried harder, reaching toward her, but Clara stepped back. I don't even know who I am anymore. She ran out of the room, leaving Alina sobbing behind the desk, clutching the locket and the papers like they were all she had left. Upstairs, Richard stirred as he heard the door slam. He walked into the study and froze at the sight of the open envelope on his desk. You opened it, he said quietly. Alina's eyes were red and wild. You knew, Richard. You let me mourn our daughter for 20 years while she was out there, alone. Richard closed his eyes, his face crumpling. It wasn't that simple. Then make it simple, she screamed. You tell me why. Richard dropped into the chair, running his hands over his face. The hospital made a mistake. She wasn't breathing when she was born. They said she didn't make it. I signed the papers. I thought I was saving you from the pain. But then a month later they called. There was confusion in the records. They said a baby had been placed in private care, no ID, no parents listed. I went to see her, Alina. I did. Alina's voice was barely a whisper. You saw her. He nodded slowly. She was tiny, fragile, but I thought, after all that loss, you couldn't handle another heartbreak if something went wrong again. So I signed the adoption papers. I told myself it was mercy. Mercy, she choked out. You call giving away my child mercy? Richard's hands shook. You were broken, Alina. You barely spoke for months. I thought I was protecting you. Alina's voice turned cold. You were protecting yourself. He looked up sharply. Don't. But she cut him off. You lied to me. You let me believe my baby was dead. You let me bury an empty coffin. Her scream echoed through the house, raw and haunting. Down the hall, Clara stood hidden by the door, tears falling silently. She heard every word. That night, she packed her things. She couldn't stay in this house, not with the woman who was her mother but didn't know her, and the man who'd stolen her life before it began. When dawn broke, Alina found the maid's room empty. On the pillow lay the locket, open, the baby's picture gone, a note beside it written in trembling handwriting. If I'm truly your daughter, I need to find out who I am without you. Don't come looking. Eleanor collapsed on the floor, clutching the note to her chest. No, not again, she sobbed. Please, not again. But even as she wept, she didn't notice Richard standing in the hallway behind her, his face dark, expression unreadable. He knew where Clara would go, because he knew something Eleanor didn't. There was more to that adoption. More people involved. And one secret that could destroy everything. 3 days later, the Winston mansion was silent again. Eleanor barely ate. Noah tried to comfort her, but she only stared out the window, waiting for a car that never came back. Mom, who is that girl? Noah asked gently. Eleanor looked at him, eyes hollow. Your sister. Noah froze. What? She's your sister, Noah. I lost her before you were born. He sat back stunned, but Dad never said. No, Eleanor said sharply. He didn't. He lied to all of us. That evening, Noah confronted his father. Is it true? Richard didn't look up from his drink. Your mother's upset, don't feed her delusions. Noah slammed his hand on the counter. Stop lying, I heard her crying. Dad, she's not delusional, she's heartbroken. Richard's jaw tightened. You're too young to understand. Noah's voice trembled. I'm old enough to know when someone's hiding the truth. He turned and left, slamming the door. For the first time, Richard felt the weight of his empire closing in on him, the lies, the guilt, the ghosts of every decision he'd made to protect his image. Meanwhile, Clara wandered through the small town she'd grown up in, the orphanage she'd left behind now reduced to an abandoned building. She sat on the steps, staring at the empty windows, feeling the weight of a past she could never rewrite. In her pocket, she carried the photo she'd taken from the locket, the baby in the hospital blanket. On the back, in faded ink, was a name she'd never noticed before, Clara Hope Winston, Ward B. Her eyes widened. Ward B. That was where the hospital kept Bobbies under observation, the ones too weak to go home. If she'd been there, maybe the records still existed. Maybe she could find the truth from someone other than the people who lied to her. She took a bus to St. Mary's Medical Center, heart pounding as she stepped inside. The building had changed, new walls, new faces, but the nameplate on the wall still carried the same emblem from the photo. At the records office, she met an older nurse who'd been there for decades. Ward B. Oh, that's old. Why are you asking, dear? Clara hesitated. I was born here in 2003. I think there was a mistake. The nurse frowned, typing something into the old database. After a long pause, she said, strange, your file's sealed. Sealed. By private order, Winston family. Clara's stomach dropped. Can you tell me who signed it? The nurse looked uneasy. Mr. Richard Winston and someone else, Dr. Lydia Brooks. Clara's hands shook. Is she still here? The nurse nodded slowly. She's retired now, lives upstate near Willow Creek. Clara thanked her and left, clutching the slip of paper with the doctor's address. Her heart raced with a mix of fury and fragile hope. If Dr. Brooks knew the truth, maybe she could finally understand why her life was stolen. But as Clara boarded the bus, a black car parked across the street turned its headlights on. Inside, Richard Winston watched through the tinted window. He'd known she would come here. He picked up his phone and spoke in a low voice. She's heading to Willow Creek, make sure she never finds that doctor. Then he hung up, his reflection caught in the window, a man trapped between guilt and fear, too deep in lies to ever come clean. Back at home, Eleanor stood in the hallway, staring at the empty maid's room again. On the nightstand, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a folded photo wedged under the lamp. It was Clara, maybe 5 years old, smiling in front of a foster home sign. On the back, in a child's handwriting, if you ever find me, I'll forgive you. Eleanor sank to the floor, whispering through tears, I will find you, Clara, no matter what it takes. But neither of them knew, someone else was already moving to make sure that reunion never happened. And that someone was willing to destroy everything to keep the past buried. The wind howled through the trees as Clara stepped off the bus in Willow Creek, a quiet town tucked between gray hills and forgotten roads. The houses looked old, tired, like they'd been keeping secrets for years. She followed the nurse's directions until she reached a small white cottage at the edge of town. A rusted mailbox read, Dr. Lydia Brooks. Clara's heart hammered as she knocked on the door. After a long pause, an elderly woman opened it, her hair silver, her eyes sharp and cautious. Yes. Dr. Brooks, my name is Clara Winston. I think you were the doctor who delivered me. The name made the woman's hand tremble slightly. Winston, she whispered, you'd better come in. Inside, the cottage smelled of old books and lavender. Clara sat on the couch, gripping her locket as the doctor studied her face carefully. You look just like your mother, Dr. Brooks said quietly. Clara's chest tightened. So it's true then, Eleanor Winston, she's my mother. The doctor sighed, sitting down. I knew this day would come. She opened a drawer and pulled out a weathered file folder, its corners frayed. I kept a copy, she said, just in case. Clara's hands shook as she took the folder. Inside was her birth certificate, her real one. Clara Hope Winston, born to Eleanor and Richard Winston. Tears blurred her eyes. Then why did they tell everyone I died? Dr. Brooks looked away. Because your father ordered it. Clara froze. What? Dr. Brooks's voice was heavy with regret. There was a complication during delivery. You were born premature, very weak. The hospital prepared to transfer you to Ward B, but before that happened, Richard Winston arrived. He said he didn't want Eleanor to see you in that condition. He ordered that the report be marked as stillbirth. He paid the hospital, paid me to keep it that way. Clara's breath caught. You helped him. I didn't understand his reasons then, Dr. Brooks said, tears forming. But a week later, I learned he'd arranged for you to be sent to a private care home under a false name. He told me your mother could never know that she was too fragile. I wanted to tell Eleanor, but he threatened to destroy my career. So I signed the papers and left the hospital. Clara pressed her hands to her face. He stole me from her. Dr. Brooks nodded slowly. He did worse than that. A few years later, I heard the care home was shut down for fraud, children being transferred and sold to foster families for money. When I checked the records, your name was gone. I thought you might have died for real this time. Clara's tears turned to fury. He knew all this, and he let her believe I was gone. Dr. Brooks put a trembling hand on her shoulder. He's a powerful man, Clara, but he's terrified of one thing, the truth. If this file comes out, his entire reputation collapses. Clara stared at the papers, proof of everything she'd lost. Then it's time everyone knew who I am. But outside, through the window, a black car sat quietly on the road. Two men inside watched as Clara left the house, file in hand. One of them made a call. She's got it. What do you want us to do? The reply crackled through the speaker. Take it. Don't hurt her unless you have to. By the time Clara realized she was being followed, the bus stop was empty. The streets were quiet. Her reflection in a store window showed two men behind her, walking slowly, pretending not to look her way. She turned into an alley, clutching the file close to her chest. Her heart raced. The sound of footsteps quickened behind her. Miss Winston, one of them called. You forgot something. She started running. The file nearly slipped from her hands as she dashed through puddles, her breath sharp in the cold night air. She turned a corner, only to find one of the men blocking the path. Please, she said, backing away. I don't want trouble. Give us the folder, the man said evenly. No one has to get hurt. Clara shook her head, clutching it tighter. This is my life, you can't take it. The other man lunged forward, but just then headlights flooded the alley. A car screeched to a stop. It was Eleanor. Clara, she cried, stepping out, her coat whipping in the wind. The men froze, exchanging glances. Eleanor's voice rose, fierce and trembling. Get away from her. They hesitated, then backed off slowly, disappearing into the shadows. Eleanor rushed to Clara, grabbing her by the shoulders. Are you hurt? Clara shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. How did you find me? I called the hospital, Eleanor said breathlessly. When I saw the sealed records, I knew you'd go there. Clara, I'm so sorry. I should have found you years ago. Clara looked at her mother's face, the same softness she'd dreamed of as a child, and in that moment she let herself be held. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like no one's child. But before either could speak again, Eleanor saw the file in Clara's hand. What is that? The truth, Clara whispered. They sat in the car together as Clara told her everything about Dr. Brooks, about the adoption, about Richard's lies. With each word, Eleanor's face hardened. He paid them, she whispered. He paid to take you from me. Clara nodded, her eyes filled with sorrow. He didn't just take me, he took your life too. Alina gripped the steering wheel, fury and heartbreak colliding in her chest. He thought he could erase the past, but not anymore. She started the car, determination burning through her tears. "We're going home, Clara. He's going to tell the truth tonight." When they pulled up to the Winston estate, the lights were still on. Richard was in the study, drink in hand, staring into the fire. When the front door opened, he turned and froze. Alina stood in the doorway, with Clara beside her. For a long moment no one spoke. The fire crackled softly, the air heavy with ghosts. Alina's voice was calm, too calm. "She knows everything, Richard, so do I." He stood slowly, trying to compose himself. "Alina, listen." "No," she snapped. "You listen, you stole my child, you lied to me, you let me grieve for 20 years so you could protect your name, and now I want you to look at her and tell her what you did." Richard's composure cracked. "You don't understand." "Say it," Alina screamed, slamming the folder onto his desk. "Say her name." Richard's lips trembled as he looked at Clara. "Clara," he whispered, "you weren't supposed to know." Clara's eyes burned with tears. "You ruined my life, you let me think I was nothing." Richard's voice broke, years of guilt spilling out. "I thought I was doing what was best. I thought if Alina believed she'd lost you, she could survive. I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," Alina said coldly, "and now everyone will know." Richard looked at the file, the documents that could destroy everything. He stepped forward. "Please, Alina, don't do this, you'll ruin our family." Alina met his eyes, her voice shaking but firm. "You already did." The silence that followed was the kind that ends everything: marriages, lies, and the illusion of control. Richard sank into the chair, his face buried in his hands. "I can't undo it," he whispered. "No," Alina said, "but you can confess." As she turned away, Clara reached for her mother's hand. Their fingers intertwined, two lives finally connected after decades of loss. But outside, a storm was rising. Because Richard Winston wasn't ready to lose everything. And by morning, one more secret would shake the house to its core. The storm hit before dawn. Rain lashed against the Winston mansion, thunder rolling over the hills like distant fury. Inside, the house was no longer quiet, it trembled under the weight of everything unsaid. Alina sat at the dining table, her hair unkempt, her eyes red from sleeplessness. Across from her, Clara sat silently, a mug of untouched coffee cooling between her hands. Neither had spoken since the confrontation hours ago. Upstairs, Richard's footsteps echoed. He hadn't slept either. Finally, Alina broke the silence. "We can't let him bury this again." Clara nodded faintly. "I don't want revenge, I just want my life back." Alina reached across the table, covering her hand. "You deserve that, you deserve everything he took." Before she could say more, Richard appeared at the bottom of the staircase, his face pale and drawn. He looked older than he had the night before, like the truth itself had aged him overnight. "I made some calls," he said quietly. "I'm going to confess to the board, the press, all of it. You'll have your name back, Clara." Alina's expression softened with disbelief. "You mean it?" Richard nodded, though his eyes carried something else, a kind of grim resignation. "It's the only way." But as the morning light crept into the room, something about him felt off. He hugged Alina briefly, whispered, "I'm sorry," and walked into his study. The door clicked shut behind him. Alina frowned. "Richard." No answer. Minutes passed, then a sound, a sharp metallic sound. Alina and Clara rushed to the door, pushing it open. Richard sat slumped at his desk, a letter in one hand, an empty bottle of pills in the other. His breathing was shallow, his eyes glazed. "Richard," Alina screamed, running to him. "Oh my God, call 911. Clara fumbled with her phone, hands shaking. As Alina cradled her husband's head, the letter slipped from his hand. It was addressed to both of them. "I can't undo what I've done. I destroyed our family because I was too proud to admit my mistake. Clara, you were never supposed to suffer. I thought I was saving your mother. Instead, I ruined her. Tell Noah the truth. Don't let him grow up with the same lies." The ambulance came too late. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, Richard Winston was gone. For hours, the house filled with sirens, voices, movement, and then silence again. Alina sat on the floor of the study, numb. Clara stood near the window, staring out at the rain-washed driveway. She felt nothing, no relief, no victory, just emptiness. "He was a coward," Eleanor whispered finally, "but he was still your father." Clara turned, her voice hollow. "Was he?" Eleanor looked at her, eyes full of grief. "You have every right to hate him, but don't let that hatred take away what's left of you." Clara sank beside her, both women crying quietly, two lives broken by one man's fear. A week later, the Winston scandal hit the news. Headlines screamed of falsified birth records, illegal adoptions, and hidden children. The family name, once respected, became a symbol of deception. Noah came home for the funeral. When he saw Clara, he froze. Eleanor stepped between them. "Noah, this is your sister." He stared at her, the same eyes, the same quiet strength. Then, without a word, he hugged her. For the first time, Clara felt like she belonged somewhere. Months passed. The mansion that once symbolized perfection now stood half empty. Eleanor sold most of Richard's companies, donating the money to children's homes across the state. Clara moved into a small apartment nearby, studying social work. She wanted to help kids like the one she used to be, lost, unwanted, waiting for someone to remember them. But one evening, as she unpacked a box of her things, she found something she didn't recognize. A small envelope tucked inside one of the folders she'd taken from Richard's office. Her name was written across it, Clara Hope. Inside was a letter in Richard's handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means the truth is out, but there's one thing you never knew: you weren't alone in that hospital. There were two of you, twins. The other baby, your brother, was taken by another family. I wanted to keep you both, but the doctors said one wouldn't survive. I chose the wrong one to save. His name was changed, Noah." Clara's breath stopped. The letter slipped from her hand. "No," she whispered, "that can't be." She read it again, every word burned deeper. Richard hadn't lied about everything, but this truth shattered her all over again. Noah wasn't her half-brother, he was her twin. She remembered their first meeting, the way they looked at each other, that unspoken familiarity, the way she'd felt something impossible to explain. It all made sense now. Her mind raced. Should she tell Eleanor? Should she tell Noah? But when she looked at the final line of the letter, her heart broke all over again. "I couldn't live with what I'd done. You both deserved the truth, but I didn't deserve to speak it." That night, Clara drove to the Winston mansion. The house was dark except for the soft light in the living room where Eleanor sat, holding an old photo album. Eleanor looked up and smiled faintly when she saw her. "I was just thinking about you." Clara sat beside her, staring at the photos: Eleanor, Richard, Noah, a perfect family built on lies. She opened her mouth to speak but stopped. The truth was too heavy. Eleanor had already lost too much. So she folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket. "Mom," she said softly, the word still strange but finally real, "let's leave this house." Eleanor looked at her, eyes tired but hopeful. "Where would we go?" "Anywhere, somewhere quiet, somewhere new." Eleanor smiled through tears. "You sound just like me when I was young." They packed what little they needed. Before they left, Clara stood in the doorway one last time, looking back at the house where she'd once been a maid and found her mother. Outside, the wind was calm again. As the car pulled away, Eleanor reached over, taking Clara's hand. "Do you think we can ever be happy again?" Clara looked out at the sunrise breaking over the horizon. "Maybe not happy," she said softly, "but free." And for the first time, the word didn't feel impossible. Behind them, the Winston mansion faded in the rearview mirror, a monument of love, lies, and loss. But in the front seat, two women finally began to live.